Consilience 2021. Over the last couple of days, we have engaged with various interesting topics. And yesterday, we began analyzing the issue of legal tech startups. Today, we will be continuing that discussion and we will understand the viewpoint of various important stakeholders. Today's discussion is particularly more interesting because all the speakers are from NLS. So it's like a mini alumni meet, so to speak. The moderator too is an NLS graduate who went on to work with Khaitan and Company after his graduation. He did his master's from Harvard Law School and became chief of staff of JSW. He's currently doing his MBA from Kellogg School in the US. Before we begin, I have a few quick housekeeping announcements. We will be reserving a few minutes in the end for the Q&A. So please feel free to use the Q&A portal below to raise any questions that you might have. Also, we will be sharing the feedback form in the end. Please make sure you fill that because it is the prerequisite for you to get the attendance certificates. Now, without further delay, I would like to invite Mr. Rishi Shroff, the moderator of today's session, to kick the discussion off. Over to you, sir.
Thanks, Harshit. So good evening. I think welcome to the final sort of session of Consilience 21. It's been really exciting. I've had the opportunity to attend a couple and very excited to moderate this panel. Got 4 people who've been doing amazing things in their field. And so very excited. So welcome, I think all 4 of you, and welcome all the attendees. Just to give you a quick background on how we think we've planned it. We've divided, based on the panel, we've divided, I think, our panelists in 3 categories of stakeholders. Just to look at it in terms of the judiciary, Dr. Sondhi, obviously, current senior counsel, but also, very soon to be a judge on the High Court of Karnataka. From the law firms, in-house counsel, non-lawyers in corporations, we've got Mr. Mahalingam. From the tech businesses, we've got Hrishikesh and Shivam, both running very exciting startups we want to hear about. So based on the stakeholder grouping, we thought we look at the topic transforming the practice of law in the 2020s in really 3 broad themes. We thought we look at it first from, just what is the tech, what's going on, what is the opportunity that legal tech presents to these different stakeholders and these different groups. The second area we thought we look at is just the challenges, what's going on, what are their struggles, what do they see that can be done different. And then because we're such a student sort of heavy attendee group, we thought we'll also look at things that can change from an education perspective, from a government policy perspective. What does it mean for you guys when you get jobs, when you enter the market? So that's really the background. We have a couple of polls we want to run as well. But before that, let me just take this opportunity to formally sort of welcome and introduce each of our panelists. Starting, like Harshit said, we're all from law school. So starting with the most senior, Dr. Sondhi, senior advocate, has been practicing law for more than 2 decades. He's an alumni of NLS, has completed an MA in political science from the Bangalore University and a PhD from the University of Mysore. He served as additional advocate general for the state of Karnataka from 16 to 18. In February 21, he was recommended to be elevated as a judge in the Karnataka High Court. Congratulations, we're very excited and we look forward to that, Dr. Sondhi. He has taught courses at NLS. His career and successes serve as an inspiration to all of us. And, I must say, in my research, I found that in an interview, he said that he sort of started and did the whole law degree as a lark. So it's fair to say for several juniors that the lark worked out and we're very grateful. So welcome, Dr. Sondhi.
Thank you.
Next up, I think Karthik, Mr. Mahalingam is sort of currently heading Flipkart corporate governance. As part of this role, he has been involved with several legal matters, the recent Walmart deal, group restructuring, setting up governance practices within Flipkart. He also graduated from NLS. He went on to work at Amarchand Mangaldas for over a decade. He was a director at Omidyar Network and later went on to work at venture capital at Shardul Amarchand. He's also done his MBA from MIT at the Sloan School, where he specifically did a lot of research and wrote a lot of papers on legal tech and AI. Third up, we have Hrishikesh. Hrishikesh is the founder and CEO of Legal Vakil Search, one of India's top sort of startups. He graduated from NLS in 2010 and soon plunged into the world of the startup sort of ecosystem. Over the last decade, he has nurtured Vakil Search today into a 300+ company, and it serves 4 lakh customers. Forbes 30 under 30 in 2017. And very proudly, we must all say that 1 in 10 company, about 10% of all companies in India today, about 1 in every 9 minutes is registered by Vakil Search. So congratulations, Hrishikesh, that's fantastic. Very excited to have you. Shivam, my youngest, graduated after me. So hello, Shivam, welcome. He's the founder of Leegality, a new age legal tech startup that helps businesses automate their paper workflows. He's an alumni of NLS. As a student, he headed the LTech. So he's sort of talking at a committee that he ran for a couple of years. Like Hrishikesh, he dived into the startup world soon after graduation, started Leegality in 2016. He has helped the company grow, and into 2020, he was a sort of finalist in the FinTech Awards at India. He was also involved in a business called Flipkart, which was a sort of food startup when I was in law school, a student-run, sort of sponsored canteen at NLS, and then grew to a few centers in Bangalore. So welcome, Shiva. Happy to have you. So that's our panel, folks. Very excited. In terms of format, we're going to do a couple of quick intros from just opening remarks from each of our panelists, and then dive in to our discussion. And then we've kept about half an hour or 20 minutes at the end for questions. We've been seeing a lot of questions from previous panels, so very happy to tackle everything that you guys want to ask the panel. Before starting, I just wanted to run 2 quick polls to sort of make it interactive and to get your thoughts. I'm just going to relaunch it. Can everyone see the poll? Okay. So if you can just fill this up, and the idea was to perhaps run the second question again to see how you guys, how you react to the panel, and if you have any sort of change in interest, change in opinion, be based on how we discuss and what we go through today. So. Give it a couple more minutes, for a couple more seconds rather, for responses to flow in. Yeah, okay. So these are your results. So legal tech has not the adoption within our group is, there's lots of scope and very divided on what you think from a jobs perspective. So that's interesting. We're going to cover that. We're going to get each of our panelists to react to what the implication for jobs are from a legal tech perspective. So with that, I think, can we start? Dr. Sondhi, some opening comments?
Sure. Thank you, Rishi, for that introduction, and thank you to the student body of NLS for this invitation. It's not just all NLS, but it's an all-male panel. So I think you might get some flack for that. Look, technology is here to stay even in the practice of the law. And I've said this before, that this dramatic turn has happened really on account of COVID last year. I guess the interface with technology in practice and in court was inevitable, but I don't think it would have happened at the speed that it has over the last 12 to 16 months. And therefore, in a sense, it's a no-brainer to question its relevance or its availability. But having said that, I am concerned with the speed and the gravity with which technology is being discussed in the context of the practice of the law. Now, I think all of us philosophically stand somewhere when it comes to technology and artificial intelligence. Are we more prone towards letting it in or keeping it out, or are we somewhere in between? And I think that is the deep question that the system and all of us need to address. To my mind, it's not a yes or no, this way or that answer. I think it's a question of identifying what are the core dimensions of the practice of the law and what are the non-core. When it comes to the core, I have in mind client interaction, drafting, research, examination of witnesses, preparation of evidence for a case, oral arguments, written submissions, and ultimately decision-making by the court. And to my mind, each of these is a core element of advocacy, of decision-making, and at its heart is and should remain human. And when it comes to these core dimensions, I think we must think long and hard before we can let technology or AI in. Human discretion, ethics, human interchange cannot be substituted, in my view, whether it's the practice of the law 500 years ago, today, or 500 years from now. In my opinion, the practice of the law should remain human and humane at the core. But when it comes to the non-core elements of a practice, everything from, say, case management to research support to case information, listing, e-filing, payment of court fees, production of certified copies, etc., I think we can tilt in the other direction, which is to have the default as letting the technology in more liberally rather than keeping it out, because that is really something that is a function of efficiency. You often hear about complaints about the system being slow, etc. And I do believe that this interface can largely improve that facet of justice delivery. I think in some ways we are now at a stage where folks were, say, 30 years ago when drafts were prepared on typewriters. Maybe many of you have never even seen a typewriter. They're now sold in antique shops for lakhs of rupees because they're so rare, something like audio cassettes. But we can hardly scorn the apparatus. Some of the best drafts that I have seen in my career have actually been typed out on typewriters simply because of the precision that was involved. And you can hardly replicate a typewritten draft as easily as you can, say, copy, paste, and print all over again. And that to me showed the cerebral input that went into less technology. Now, that doesn't mean that you can expect a typewriter user to argue against the intervention of a word processor. Obviously not. But I think the caveat here is, are you doing this to speed up and increase efficiency in your chamber, or are you treating it as a crutch? And many times I have seen drafts where, because of the laziness, the availability of a cut and paste, you have facts that don't belong to a case. You have names of parties who are not parties to that litigation. Forget about privacy violations and so on. It just looks so bad. And I've seen that with research as well. I know I don't have too much time, but I want to make this point that law research remains a non-technology exercise, in my opinion. At best, a research search engine can give you case law or material a little faster than physically browsing through books. But that said, the application of a judgment to the facts of a particular case can hardly be left to Manupatra, or for that matter to Google. I'm astounded to see now legal research takes place on Google. Jesus, I mean, anyway. But I will also say that with this almost burst of technology, as if there is no other conversation, there are two other major issues. And Rishi, if you'll give me that one more minute. One is, who's controlling all of this technology, right? As you know, judicial functions cannot be delegated. They're treated as solemn. Even a registrar is not entitled to exercise a judicial function that a judge is supposed to. And are we then suddenly through the back door letting in technology outfits into justice delivery? I'm a little concerned about that. I mean, it's not just a privacy issue. I think it's also an issue about what control that can manifest. We know that AI gives us what we want to hear. It controls us. I was reading a fine article which talked about inadvertent biases that can be created in the law. And that can be a very dangerous sort of intervention. And the other thing for me is, and Rishi, you wanted me to, all of us to say something to the student body. And I would say that it's again a no-brainer to say that you need to talk about law and technology. I mean, that's exactly what this conference is about. But I want to say that the more you're hearing about technology, the greater the onus on the law school to speak to you about the human element of the law and about the law itself. You cannot get swept away with technology and assume that the core of your your profession is going to change. Certainly, as far as advocacy is concerned, I know that my colleagues come from a different dimension, a lateral dimension of the law where the interface might be much greater. But here, you need to be reminded that ultimately it's your own cerebral and intellectual and ethical elements that are going to make you who you are as a counsel in the practice. And I think that onus is reinforced on law schools to not get just carried away with conversations around technology, but to revert to speaking to the student body about the human element of the law. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sondhi. That's very, very insightful. I think, as we dive into some of the discussion, it would be very good to then ask you, where you think it can fit in and in what way it's been helpful, what you've seen. But Mr. Mahalingam, what's your view on the corporate side? What have you seen? What are your opening thoughts?
Yeah, well, thank you, Rishi, and the rest of the panel over here. It's wonderful to be back here, and it's great to be back in NLS, albeit virtually. But just a piece of trivia. When I was in law school in 2000, Consilience was it was the first sort of event of Consilience that we had. And I'm just sort of amazed to see that in the last 20 years, it's changed so much and we've gone ahead so much in terms of technology and everything else. And I know yesterday's panel was talking about a small computer lab at the basement of NLS. And today we're all working from home and have access to a lot more technology and various other things that are available to us. So I think, as Aditya mentioned, law and technology is a no-brainer, and I think it is definitely the need of the hour. How much we sort of adopt it and how much we are willing to sort of scale it is the question that is required now. So, but before I jump into it, I just wanted to make a disclaimer that the views that I express are all my personal views, not of any organization, so to speak. Having been in the sort of the law firm, in-house and business space for a while now, I sort of clearly look at it and say that a large part of a typical lawyer's role, especially in certain practices, can be easily commoditized and automated. And this holds true for both private practice and in-house legal professionals. But the incentive to adopt this technology is minimal. And if you look at a typical law firm which charges by the hour, when you automate, how do you sort of transpose those charges to the client, and by making it more efficient, is your billing going to come down and that kind of stuff? Questions which are sort of early stage, but people who start thinking about it realize that there is much more value in using associates for higher end and much more complex structuring and thinking around issues. So I think legal tech is relevant for both law firms and in-house. And though the market is small, it is slowly growing. And I think there was a question on the polls as to, do you think this will replace jobs? And I think that's a very insightful question and something which a lot of people grapple with. But I presume that it will be tougher to replace experience and institutional knowledge. And it would be more for the heavy lifting, which is done maybe by a junior lawyer in a diligence sort of situation or whatever. So I think that the human element, as Aditya mentioned, is so important because the way the algorithm is coded, it reflects this human element and how you want to do it. So I think when you have coders, they have to look at it from both aspects. I've been sort of looking at this for a while, even before. And when I went to MIT, I did have the opportunity to do a white paper on legal tech. And for the benefit of you all, I think it's on my LinkedIn page if you guys want to look at it and read it. Fairly interesting discussions. I had, I think, spoken to maybe about 100 plus people in the legal tech space, and just getting their views. And there were people in various geographies, India, US, UK, in Africa, and some other countries as well in Southeast Asia. And it's quite interesting to see how I think it's a very universal requirement for legal tech to be applied in most of their cases. And of course, there are nuances in certain countries which is there. But legal tech is a subset of legal operations, and that is basically the set of business activities that you can use to minimize the ability to spend on a easily automated task, right? So ability to convince your business stakeholders that this is something worth including in your sort of setup, whether it is in a law firm or in an in-house setup, is something which I find not many people have been able to do. So I think it's convincing those stakeholders that this will allow for better strategic planning, financial management, vendor management, and analytics, and all of that. So interestingly, there was a statistics which said that the legal services market was expected to cross $1 trillion in 2021. And that's a huge market. But how much of that market is being serviced by legal tech or reg tech or legal ops? It's a very, very small sort of piece of that. So I think we still have a long way to go. And of course, we have two founders in the panel as well. And I think it's a fantastic job that you guys are doing. I mean, a lot of the founders today have challenges in terms of funding, reach, conversion to a sale, finding the right product market fit, getting paying customers, building traction. And they're constantly pivoting, constantly refining, trying to understand what is the best sort of solution which the customer will appreciate. And it's taken them time to sort of get to where they are. And I know both Shivam and Hrishikesh have done fantastically well and are well recognized even in the Indian ecosystem and go to for some of the solutions that they provide. So, and of course, SaaS is what is effectively being handled in such cases. So huge kudos to all of you legal tech entrepreneurs who are currently doing this and want to do this. I think the key is resilience, perseverance, and just trying to keep doing what you're doing and improve on it. So, and I know that in the US and Europe, they're slightly better off in terms of funding and market adoption. But I've seen, at least in the US, 65% or more is more discovery, which I hope with this whole new concept of digital India, we should be able to get it. And with folks like Aditya on the bench, we should see some of that coming in. And of course, when we talk about academics itself, um, even in Harvard, where I was doing this sort of cross-registered study on this thing, I went into the Harvard Law School saying, you guys must probably have studied this a hell of a lot, and you should have enough data points for me to sort of build out something over here. And they came back and said, Karthik, when you finish your paper, let us know and we'll discuss. So I think there is a lot happening, but maybe not as much on the academic side. But interestingly, there have been several smaller schools and which I think have done a lot of good work in training lawyers to get into legal tech as a profession. I mean, typically it's either the litigation or the law firm or the in-house world that you get trained for. But now there are courses run by, say, for example, Suffolk University or Chicago Kent or the Miami School of Law, which are building out these courses where you can be a trained legal professional. And I spoke to the recent head of Google's legal operations, and she's now, of course, moved into a legal tech company in a community role. But her point was the same, saying that we just do not have enough professionals in legal tech to be able to help build this out in a better, more professional fashion. So even as I'm looking to hire folks who may be interested in building out this legal tech or legal ops, the actual pool of candidates that you get are very limited. And then you're like, okay, should I go in and get someone from a McKinsey or a Bain, like a consulting experience to come in and do this? And they probably don't understand the law. And I know several lawyers who've gone to McKinsey. So can we get a right mix of that? So I think those are there. And then, of course, schools also need to encourage legal tech entrepreneurs. So I know like Harvard has two or three companies which have been formed by folks from these schools, and NLS has several of those as well. So fantastic to see that we're a leader in building out and helping these startups, but how much the school can do to help you build further, I think that's something which I would definitely like to see. And also, I think blockchain and AI, I keep hearing about, and it sounds very sexy to say that I have this in my software or as a marketing pitch. but very often it's a very small percentage of items that actually use this blockchain and AI. And I think people need to understand that though it's a technology disruptor, how many people are actually looking at the sample size, the data sets that you're getting for doing this. Even the well-established players like Akira or Luminance or whatever, even though they're approaching multiple law firms with the same product, each law firm has a different way of approaching it, because the sample data sets which come to you are going to be very, very basic. And each law firm has to then build on it using its own proprietary knowledge and skills. So being able to build that out in a more open source fashion, which could help people, I think definitely is exciting. And I haven't seen a legal tech token in the crypto space for those who follow it, but I've heard of a few who are now building ICOs in this thing. So I think this whole smart digital contract world is definitely going to see it. And then of course we're in this whole Gartner hype curve, where you can see like there's a technology trigger which sort of gets people involved and engaged in this, and then you have this whole sort of expectations and disillusionment that you get through, and then eventually it settles down, and then you're like, okay, this is what legal tech can do for me, these are the various pieces, and this is how I can sort of use it to solve my specific problem. So I think there's a lot of work happening in this space, and folks on the panel and otherwise the audience who's sort of also here. So I think it's definitely an exciting space to be in, and I wish you all the best of luck. So, and happy to answer questions subsequently on this.
Thanks, Mr. Mahalingam. So, Hrishikesh, what's your view? We've heard two views, which are sort of moderated by a lot of experience and a lot of years of work in the space. But as a tech startup, started in law school when I was around, and your journey for the last so many years, what's it been? What's your take?
So thanks, Rishi. And I say this, like Karthik said, all the views I expressed today are going to be my own views. I think that it's a false dichotomy we are talking about, right, between law and technology. The way the world is transforming, the direction in which we are headed, technology is an enabler to literally everything that we do, right? So I definitely disagree respectfully with what Aditya said about letting technology in and keeping technology out. I don't think that's a choice that we have the luxury of making. And in fact, even if we did, hypothetically, that's not a choice we should ever make. Right? If you, I just cite an anecdote to start with, but the population of horses was the highest in 1915, right? After which it dramatically declined because the motor car made the horse redundant. So I noticed your question in the beginning in the poll when we started, like, is technology going to be a disruptor when it comes to lawyers looking for jobs? While that's a pertinent question, I think that's the kind of question that creates an artificial fear in the minds of young to-be lawyers and lawyers, right? That technology is somehow a force for potential evil, which will prevent lawyers from getting access to the kind of jobs and work that they had earlier. I think what technology is doing and what artificial intelligence and machine learning is all about is it's changing what it means to be human, right? So maybe 10, 15 years ago, what was the work of a junior or an intern or an apprentice in a law firm or in a law practice? Probably what Aditya and Karthik also have, what all of us have done while interning with different, someone mentioned the computer lab in the basement. I think I was the second last batch which had that computer lab in the basement. You and Shivam haven't even seen it, right? But from there to where we are today, it's a massive transformation that we are all looking at, we're all experiencing, right? So it's changing what it means to be human. What technology was able to do then and what technology is able to do today are completely poles apart. Technology today can do what we would call as basic cognitive and thinking tasks, right? So what does it mean for us as practicing or law tech entrepreneurs? It definitely means that we need to start thinking about what is the next phase of human consciousness around the law, right? So if technology is going to help us do a lot of what we would otherwise have to do with blood, sweat, and tears earlier, how do we use the time that it frees up to elevate the practice and delivery of law for the common man and for the small business, who's ultimately the customer of the law, right? So the way I personally look at it, I know that Aditya wrote an article once about the romance of the law, right? So I look at law completely devoid of romance. I look at the law as a tool for social good, in the sense that if you have, I look at it in a slightly more commoditized manner. There are two people, hypothetically, who have a dispute between them, right? So the law is that catalyst which allows that dispute to be resolved by any metric, by any framework, right? India is extremely poor in terms of its ability to deliver that justice in a defined time frame. We are lagging behind not just the developed world, but even developing countries in the time it takes, in the quality of the justice provided, in the overall experience of a litigant, right? So if we measure customer satisfaction for a product or for a service, why are we not measuring customer satisfaction of the litigants who are approaching our legal system? And if we were to ask the average litigant, what was his customer satisfaction as a recipient of a legal service from our courts, from our lawyers, from our law firms, on average, the experience is really poor, right? It takes years, it takes decades. You have to wait outside courts. There's no clarity as to how long it's going to take. There's no clarity as to how much it's going to cost. There is absolutely no clarity. So for a common man or for a small business, right, it is literally hell. So in this context, we need to accept the reality of what we have managed to do and what we have not managed to do as a country. We have managed to build, to some degree, a working rule of law in this country. What we have not managed to do, however, is to transform that working apparatus into something that delivers justice rapidly and in a manner that serves the interests of the people which it is supposed to serve. So in that context, in that framework, what can technology do? Technology can do a tremendous amount. On the more transactional side, technology can rapidly allow small business owners or individuals to get basic work done. It can allow them to start incorporating companies in hours or days. Right? It can allow them to get a trademark filed within minutes. It can allow them to get a document drafted within seconds. Right? So those are good things. On the other side, how can it be used to empower? Aditya is going to be on the bench very soon, extremely proud of what he's managed to achieve. But how can it empower Aditya and his brother judges? How can it empower lawyers to help clients get justice delivered faster? And I use justice in a broad sense, but basically a resolution of disputes within a very rapid time frame, which allows people to get back to their normal lives and not get stuck in a dispute. So we should not look at law and technology as a dichotomy. We should look at technology as an enabler, much like a cycle is an enabler for someone who wants to get from place A to place B. A cycle just allows you to get there faster. So technology is an enabler. We don't really have a choice in terms of letting technology in or keeping technology out, right? The only question we need to ask is, what is the goal that we have set for ourselves as a country, as a legal system? What is that goal, right? So do we want, hypothetically, do we want people to, once from the day they file a dispute, we want them to get a final resolution of the dispute within 90 days, right? Let's look at justice delivery. Let's look at everything as a commodity for a moment. Once a person has a dispute, once a person wants to start a company, we as a country have to give that person a clarity in terms of how much time is it going to take, right? And from that framework, how can technology help us to get there extremely rapidly? So then the vistas are quite wide. Can technology allow judges to prejudge based on all the information flowing in, based on all the trends in historical data? Can it allow judges, can it give judges nudges in terms of, look, these are the facts, these things stand out. So the time it takes for a judge to go through the facts of a case and come to one of 3 or 4 possible conclusions, from which I agree with Aditya, the human mind is to choose one, right? Based on rationality, based on fairness. But can it allow the judge to take decisions faster? Can it allow lawyers can AI and ML allow lawyers to do legal research at 10x the speed? Of course it can, right? Can it allow a small business owner to incorporate a company from the comfort of his home or his office within minutes? Of course it can, right? So then the question, we need to really work backwards from a goal we are setting for ourselves as a legal system and as a country. And working backwards from that goal, we need to not ask ourselves, where can we let technology in? We need to ask ourselves, where all can technology be used to accelerate the achievement of that goal? Technology has to take us to the status of where the developed nations are today and beyond. Like how we leapfrogged the desktop revolution and went straight away to the mobile revolution. We had that advantage simply because we didn't have enough desktops. Today, all of us are accessing the internet on mobile phones. We have that unique advantage today of being able to leapfrog what the path which, say, the UK or the US have taken and directly go to AI and ML powered in different ways. And I take Karthik's point completely. AI and ML today are still in their infancy. But how do we plan? Say in 5 years from now, we will be the fastest nation in terms of disposal of cases. How in 5 years from now, we will be the best nation to do business in. in 5 years from now will be the country with the maximum protection of intellectual property. So we need to set ourselves these lofty goals and then really use technology in terms of powering us forward, as opposed to at any point shrinking on fear from it. Right? We should not fear technology. We should use technology as an accelerant to get to extremely lofty, ambitious goals, not just for ourselves, but also for the country. So that's my overall perspective. Tremendously happy to be here, by the way. I like Aditya said, I know it is not a very gender fair panel. It's extremely skewed in favor of the male gender, and it's going to definitely draw us some flack, but excited to see what Consilience has become. It's great that the number of people on a Sunday is so high. So very happy to be here, and thanks for the invitation, and very proud of what my panelists are doing as well.
Thanks, Hrishikesh. Dr. Sondhi, we're going to give you and Mr. Mahalingam a chance to respond to some of that. But Shivam, why don't we hear your view? What's been your experience?
Right. So before I begin, I think one very interesting, since all of us have talked about the evolution of Consilience, there's one interesting thing also which I noticed is that throughout the last 2 decades, I saw Consilience being termed as the common point between law and technology. And this time I saw a new circle of business. So that was definitely something very interesting to see, and great to see that even a student committee in college is starting to realize the impact, the way the interaction, that business actually, the business component of the 3 circles is also a crucial component that we need to talk about. So great to see that. And now coming to the topic we are discussing, I think all the panelists have tackled the question very, very interestingly. My experience with respect to legal tech has been kind of restricted to how businesses and individual citizens in the economy interact with the law. And so my exposure has not been that much around advocacy and how the judicial systems interact, like what the systems of law there, but more around how businesses interact with the legal systems, how individual citizens interact with the legal system. So wanted to just caveat that what I will be saying comes from that perspective, right? So talking about legal tech, I think a lot of discourse about legal tech from where I see it as skips a few stages. Because the way we have seen how Indian companies, how Indian citizens, the Indian government is handling legal processes, I think talking about AI and ML is skipping a few stages, because we have not even managed to digitize most of the processes yet, right? For the last government, the Information Technology Act has existed in India since the year 2000, which has recognized digital evidence, which has recognized digital documents, which has recognized digital signatures. But even 2 decades post that, we still see, like, even across the economy, across even judiciary, we see that the first, like, AI, let alone AI, MLB, we are not even managed to digitize most processes. So from that perspective, I agree when Hrishikesh says that we need to probably look at technology as a solution. When we start skipping these 2-3 stages and start talking about legal technology as what could it potentially be maybe a decade later, that is when it starts to instill that feeling of fear, whether it can take away jobs or what can impact it can have. But I think at least the stage you are at right now, at least for the next decade, I only see technology being only solving problems, right? Because even when we deploy, even in the field we work, where we help organizations digitize their documentation processes, we see that the ability for businesses to do that, the power it provides to in-house legal counsels, to business decision makers inside the businesses, to their customers, and to various people interacting with those businesses, and to the citizens, it's brought about a huge change, right? Like what used to take, we saw that before we managed to digitize the document processes of a few businesses, a document used to take 5 to 10 days to be executed. It used to take 400 to 500 rupees for a document. There used to be runners running around, clerks running around, printing, scanning, couriering involved. And now using technology, we managed to bring that cut all of that out and bring about a 90-100%, 90-95% efficiency, and and reduce the TAT of the document execution from 5 to 10 days to probably 5 to 10 minutes. Right. So from that perspective, I think what Mr. Sondhi was also mentioning, that when we are talking about the non-core aspects of the law, technology is definitely something which needs to be let in very, very soon. And I think technology with respect to every profession, every sector, even in a personal lives, technology changes don't happen overnight. They don't happen too fast. They don't happen too slow. All these changes are always steady, right? Like even if across our lifetimes, we have seen that in the last, it probably took WhatsApp 5 to 10 years to become what it is today. It took Uber, Swiggy, all that Zoom, all these tools to become what they are over decades. So I think even in legal, when we talk about like legal processes, the practice of law, we are still a little far away from where we need to be fearful of the changes that technology will make to law as a field. I think right now, as I said, we are mostly technology. What even on the ground, when I interact with a lot of legal tech solutions around in the market and see what kind of innovation is happening in the market, I think the stage is indeed quite infancy, and right now most processes are at the digitization stage. So from that perspective, I do not think that we need to be fearful of technology. Overall, in terms of comfort, we did see that when we started out 3-4 years ago, there used to be a lot of questions among the legal fraternity as to whether, because like apart from legal research databases, there has not been a lot of exposure to legal technology among the legal fraternity. But I think over the last 4 years, and especially through the pandemic, we have seen a lot of that change, where a lot of people people in the legal fraternity are more and more comfortable with adapting to technology. And I'm sure that across, as beyond, when we come out of this pandemic, we're going to see, as we are seeing with all other the digital adoption in all other fields, it's also going to be similar here. And I think, yeah, that's all I have to say right now.
No, thanks, Shivam. Dr. Sondhi, you've heard from everyone. You've heard that, Hrishikesh's take, Shivam's take on digitization. As someone who's going to sit on the judiciary, what do you think? What would you like? What would empower the judiciary? What would make it better, all better on ground? What's your take? What's your experience?
Rishi, I'm still very much a counsel, so I will only speak in that capacity, but I can tell you that migration has already happened. In fact, the concept of a VC hearing has become the default setting now. There would be no justice delivery if there was no provision for VC hearings of cases, right? You'd practically have courts shut down for a year or two, and you can imagine the awful effect that would have on litigants who are waiting for justice. So in that sense, obviously, technology has furthered justice delivery. But I reiterate what I said earlier, and maybe that's where we're conflating issues. We're conflating non-dispute and dispute scenarios. We're conflating transactional and litigation scenarios all in one, and then trying to redefine what it is to be human. Now, to me, that's a very deep and a visceral and a philosophical exercise that has to be made. Can technology change who we are as humans at the core? Of course, but the question is, should it? Today, you have bots that are artists who interpret art and write poetry. But are we then migrating to a paradigm where we are outsourcing justice delivery? I mean, to me, that is constitutionally a difficult position to accept. Right? Hrishikesh mentioned an example where a judge can be given facts that are picked up by technology. Why technology? That's the counsel's job. It's my job as the counsel and my opposing counsel to simplify a case and provide a brief and a written submission to a judge by being precise and direct and fair to the court. That is in a way making my role as a counsel redundant. I would be extremely uncomfortable if a judge decides a case not based so much on the advocacy that is presented on the written brief, but on the basis of an app or a software that picks up facts that are more relevant than the other. How on earth, tell me, in a criminal case or in a writ petition, is an app going to tell a court which fact is more important than the other to lead to a conviction or an acquittal, or what sentence to be delivered, or whether a law is constitutional or not? How is an app going to tell a judge what the conduct of the parties is? You know that in writ jurisdiction, it's an equity discretionary jurisdiction. Conduct of parties, etc., is paramount. Is that going to be done by a bot or by a software? So please don't get me wrong. I'm not a fossil who's arguing against technology, but I am very clear in my mind that this demarcation of what is core and what is non-core has to be done very clearly. I may be wrong on that bifurcation. Maybe we need to sit down and look at this discussion more vertically. Maybe alongside me, if you had 5 other folks from the litigation sphere, you would perhaps get a different view on it. But I'm not going to lean towards a paradigm which commodifies justice, commercializes justice. I don't think so. Customers, no, I don't think so. They're clients. I don't think a patient is a customer, or a student is a customer, or a client is a customer, because the very relationality with the service provider then changes. The profession then begins to redefine itself. Again, I say there's no difficulty in redefining it, but be very careful as to whether you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And I do also want to say this, that I think there is an overemphasis on speed of delivery. We're assuming here that if you're getting a decree, Hrishikesh said 90 days, fine. But if you're getting a judgment in 90 days, I would be very worried actually. Because I have seen hundreds of cases in my career where trial courts sometimes, under the pressure of work and the need to have disposals, have sometimes written judgments that are not justice. Cases, I will tell you, that have gone on for trial for 10, 12 years have been reserved for judgment, and sometimes that judgment arrives in 10 days. Now, you may, of course, question why the trial took 12 years. That's a valid question. And how would technology speed that up is the moot point. But in trying to correct that wrong, if you're not going to appreciate the evidence, read the brief, apply the law, consider the submissions made, and are simply going to give an end product or that commodity of a decree to somebody, please don't kid yourself. That's not justice, because it may serve one party, the successful party, but that judgment won't stand. In many ways, you're multiplying litigation, because the aggrieved party is straight away going to take that to the High Court or the Supreme Court. The higher court is straight away going to reverse it simply because it can't stand. So please understand this, that at the heart of practice and decision making is a certain human balance that comes in. And if that is going to be outsourced in some way, I have my serious doubts whether that's going to exponentially increase justice. I share Hrishikesh's view, and I see what Shivam is saying when he talks about documents, etc. In fact, those are the parts where technology has to come in. No two ways about it. There was an instance, and I'll close with this. There was an instance of a case, I think in Allahabad, if I'm not wrong, where a convict was in appeal. His appeal did not get listed before the bench for the entire duration of his sentence, because the counsel concerned did not take the trouble to remove office objections. I mean, can there be a worse instance of travesty of justice? Now, if you had an app there, you had a website or a technology intervention, which straight away told the court or the registry, look, office objections not removed for 6 weeks, please put it up before the court. It's a criminal case. Whether or not there was a lawyer, the judge would have seen the need to do some justice in it. Convict or acquit is besides the point. But how can you live with a scenario where a case does not come before the court simply because of some human error. So that is where justice is served. That is where you need technology. But some lines have to be drawn.
Mr. Mahalingam, I think that's very, very insightful from someone leading in the litigation side. One of the things that I've come across in the research that I've done on the corporate side to extend some of these discussions has been that some of this can really help with the democratization of law, right? Because you give access to non-lawyers. There are people who otherwise would not be able to process documents, would not be able to do any sort of legal analytics. What has been your experience on the corporate side, law firms and companies? And really, has this improved? Can technology really improve access on some of on the business aspects? What has been your experience? Like take a legal Zoom, or take some of these guys who are trying to do solving some of the problems prior to it getting to litigation.
Yeah. No, thanks, Rishi. I think even if you look at the panelists here, one is trying to have a DocuSign equivalent, one is helping companies incorporate. Very important for a law firm. Also for companies which are in-house, right? So I think the question to ask here is how many companies have formally engaged with them when you compare it to the universe of companies that is available. So, and I don't have numbers, and of course, I'm not sure if they want to share their numbers, but if you have, say, 500 companies on the stock exchange, how many of those 500 companies are using technology today, even simple technology like a DocuSign or a Leegality, to be able to sign contracts, even if it's a simple employment contract? Are you using it, or are you still relying on the sort of age-old wet signature sort of concept? So I think it's as simple as that. And then of course it goes on to much more complex things. So like if you are working on an M&A transaction at a law firm, given the sheer size of the transaction and the deal complexities, are we using a vendor for the diligence? Are we sort of having, and who do we typically use in diligence? It's the kid who's just graduated from law school, right? He's expected to go into a data room. He's expected to pour through documents and expected to find errors. And often, sometimes is just sort of not even given any adequate training or anything of that sort. And he comes out saying, yes, there are no red flags in this diligence. Do you want to do that? Or would you prefer to pass it through some sort of technology intervention where all of those documents are scanned for keywords and then done? I'm not saying the technology intervention is going to be the be all and end all. That can lead to several errors as well, because keyword recognition is the challenge here. And just like a junior associate, I mean, the technology may miss it for a variety of reasons. Either it's not printed properly, or there is some challenge while reading it, or whatever of that sort. But I think we need both to be able to do a good job. I don't think this is a one and only sort of situation. And I think once you've got that input from the technology, then you have somebody, a human, sort of review it just to make sure that there are no apparent errors. And then sort of proceed to send it up the value chain for review to your sort of senior associate, principal, partner, whatever of that sort. And then it goes to the client. So somewhere along that, I'm hoping it will get picked up if there is a technology or a human intervention challenge. And typically it happens with the human intervention more often right now. But having said that, I know lots of firms in India who have started using technology, similar technology, to be able to do this. But they're also now considering, how do we charge the client for this? Because what used to take maybe 15 hours is now done in 15 minutes. And if I charge 15 minutes worth of my billable hours, do I make money on this transaction? And at the end of the day, unlike the lofty ideals of the bar and bench of law as a profession, the corporate firm and everyone else is just treating it as law as a business. And when you're treating law as a business, you are bound by bottom lines, revenue, profitability, all of that, right? So how do you determine that this makes sense for people? So both for the client as well as the law firm provider. So I think there are some challenges there, and there are various models which are being discovered slowly, and we need to figure out what works. But I think we're at that early stage and the cusp of sort of getting to the next big thing. So we should see what happens at that stage.
Hrishikesh, how do you react to what Dr. Sondhi and Mr. Mahalingam are saying? I think law is a profession versus as a business. Dr. Sondhi raises very, very important points on the effect for the judiciary. On the business side, we find a lot of it is perhaps, baby steps or the right first steps for what it can do for business. But on the judiciary side, I would like you to respond to some of the, the points that Dr. Sondhi raised. From the commercialization, do we want to do that or do we not? And what's your experience on your startup and the services you offer?
No, good question, Rishi. And I want to just clarify, I don't think at all that Aditya is a fossil, right? Far from it. I think he's one of the leading lights as far as NLS is concerned, as far as the judiciary is concerned. He's one of the people we are pinning our hopes on to really move the judiciary into the next dimension. But having said that, I think if anyone were to argue that the law is not already commercialization, go to the parking lot of the Supreme Court, right? You will see the sheer extent of commercialization, right? And the biggest beneficiaries are the BMWs and Mercedes of the world. That they didn't appear there by magic. Clearly, the system is commercialized. Clearly, there are outsized benefits to those who are able to manage the system well. And by manage, I mean it in the most respectful way possible, right? The people who can handle the system well, the people who can navigate the system well are able to make outsized returns. It's clearly a rent-seeking environment today, right? Why? Because justice is dispensed based on face value, justice is dispensed based on who is appearing before the judge, etc. Again, I say these are all my personal views. Don't want to conflate them with anything else. So that's the answer to your commercialization question. I think that commercialization is, if anybody were to argue that the law is a noble profession, it is anything that you do with sincerity is noble, right? So I'm not taking away from the nobility of the practice or the work that Shivam or I or Karthik or Aditya are doing. What all of us are doing is noble because you're trying to do something with the right intent to serve people who come to us looking for solutions. Having said that, to somehow argue that the nobility is at odds with commercial or business interests, that is just to live in one's own happy delusion, right? That's completely, if I would use that word, bogus. So the law is commercial. The law must be commercial. The law is a business for the people who practice law, for the people who work in law firms, for people like me and Shivam. It is a business, right? And just because it's a business doesn't mean that it can't have a positive social outcome. Or that it can't be that business can't do social good, right? Anyone who's gone to Arvind Eye hospitals, it's one of the most profitable eye hospitals in the world, but it's also one of the most profoundly social institutions that exists, right? So it is not a dichotomy, or it is not a conflict between what is social and what is commercial. Things can be commercial and social at the same time, and justice delivery and the law itself, whether it's practiced through a legal tech institution or it's practiced through a company or it's practiced through the system, the litigation system, it's commercial and it's also social. So I'm just clarifying that point. Now, when it comes to, you asked another question, right, about my response to Aditya, and I'm going to just keep it simple. I think a lot of us in India, especially, we just accept things the way they are, as the way they are, right? We don't question why they can't be different. Like if, for example, Norway or Finland, I'm not sure which country, but can resolve a dispute in 58 days, right? Why don't we first look at what that goal can be for the country? I completely take Aditya's point. Just blindly setting a goal with the existing infrastructure and the existing system will lead to chaos. It will lead to probably a complete miscarriage of justice. But if we say that, okay, as a country, we want to help people resolve disputes within 90 days, and we want to build a system that allows that to happen, right? That system will be an amalgam of multiple things. It will be, obviously, you will have to increase the number of judges. You will have to speed up the pace at which the case moves through courts. Like Aditya said, you can't have something languishing for years on end because a minor technicality has not been taken care of. So all of those things will, in fact, be ironed out once we set that goal. But my only point is we need to set that goal. We need to have an end in mind. as to where we want to take the system, right? And that applies to not just court cases, but also things like incorporating a company, where I'm happy to say in the last 5-6 years with the current, in the last from 2014 onwards, there's been a tremendous change. We have seen a tremendous decrease in corruption. We have seen that companies get incorporated faster, trademarks get registered faster. I mean, there's a lot of, without taking a political stand, there's a lot of changes which have happened for the better, right, on the transactional side. So as an overall legal system, we need to set certain goals. We need to aspire to achieve those goals, and we need to build a very robust system, of which I believe technology will be a very integral part in making that goal happen, right? And finally, to answer Aditya's point, again, I take that point. It's a good rebuttal as to, you know, can technology redefine what it means to be human, to the extent that the application of mind can be partially assisted by technology? Yes, it can redefine what it means to be human. So instead of a judge or a lawyer having to pour through a 200-page document to pick up salient points, right, it can potentially read that 200-word document in 200 seconds and pull out potentially 20 points of interest. Now, the lawyer or the judge may choose to read the entire document. And, you know, in some cases they might, if it's an important enough case. But if the facts, if the information, if the technology is able to pull out the information very well, the way, say, an apprentice or an intern would, and present it to the judge or the lawyer, what is wrong with that, right? And the beauty of machine learning and artificial intelligence is it only gets better with time. So the more it learns, the more it learns. So I definitely see an application where if we set an ambitious goal, all of this starts with that if we are to accept the premise that we need to change, if we are to accept the premise that faster justice delivery is a goal that this nation desperately needs to go after, in that context, I think technology can have a lot of profound impacts, provided, of course, and I'll close with this, we set up a system to ensure there's no miscarriage of justice.
No, thank you for that, Hrishikesh. Shivam, straight question to you. You've been trying to sell your product. You've heard so much from all these folks. What's been the adoption challenge? Why are they adopting it? You know, what has been the good and the bad on adoption? You know, is Dr. Sondhi's point about the risks of legal tech causing adoption being difficult? Is it just the tech is not good enough yet? You know, what's your experience?
Right. So Rishi, I think the Indian legal ecosystem till now has faced a challenge of improper solutioning, to be honest. Even when we began 4.5 years ago, we started when we realized that there is a problem, there is a huge problem in the market, and there are laws, there are statutes that support, that provide the basic framework on how to solve that problem, right? But the market has not been able to come up with solutions which can convince the legal fraternity, which can convince the lawyers, which can convince everyone that using technology for legal processes is comfortable, is okay, and is in fact beneficial, right? So I think, and we have seen this change substantially over the last 4 or 5 years, where we have seen a very good quality of solutions being seen in the market of late, and that parallelly with the overall trend in digitization and use of technology across sectors, across industry, the massive push that the government has been putting on technology. In fact, if you talk about the first instance of technology being used for law, it's probably the government mandating filings, MCA filings to be done using technology, right? So that way, government has been in fact a champion of digitization of legal processes in that way. So I think, as I said, the problem till now has been of solutioning based on what we have seen. And initially we did also like ourselves see that there were used to be hesitations around use of technology with respect to legal processes, but with ample education, with demonstration of reliability of the technology, I think the market has changed a lot in the last 4 or 5 years, and I think in this decade we will see a lot of changes happening on the ground as well.
Dr. Sondhi, you know, moving to our third theme, given all that we've heard and what Shivam has just talked about, and you know, you've taught at NLS as well and in other places, and given lots of very interesting lectures. For our audience that's so student heavy, how do we prepare for this? Given what you've mentioned, about the risks and, what can be, cannot be tech based. One part is on just, what we would need to do to prepare ourselves. And then secondly, and this is, I want to ask everyone, this is just from a government perspective, what support and what changes would be. But first on the education part, what's your take?
Look, Rishi, I've publicly said that the NLU model of education in some ways is detached from reality. It doesn't give us the entire picture. I didn't get it. And there was way too much hard learning to be done once we graduated. And I would reiterate that. Today, you've actually taken this conversation into a deeper ground. The gravitas of it is very important because we can't lightly talk about defining or redefining a profession unless we really know what it's about. If the student body wants to undertake this exercise of redefining the profession of advocacy, then their interface with it has to be very real, right? 23 years into the profession, I still consider myself a novice, because there are people who've had 70 years of experience at the bar. And the way they see things is different, and in some ways far more supple and wise than I do. So it's a dangerous path to take for granted that the system is what it is, because then that's where prejudices come in. And I think the law school curriculum is very well tutored at creating prejudices, but not breaking them. And that's been my experience, right? So if you started this with a poll about the legal system, do you think it's slow, it's prone towards the powerful, etc.? Your answers would demonstrate that bias. That's not to say that it's entirely wrong. But Hrishikesh said the BMW culture of the parking lot in the Supreme Court. But let me say, a lot of people are uncomfortable with it. I drive an Ambassador. But I charge my fee all the same because I've struggled for years. And as a senior, if I can make my money now, I make it. But I don't see it as a commercialization. And you know what happens there is then you get into this game where it's about purchasing power. When I say that, I mean that in a guarded way. What I mean is if you bring in the business element directly, then why not bring in advertisements also for practicing lawyers? You don't have that today, right? And when I say purchasing power, I mean then it's a function of affordability. There was a question here, can a young first generation lawyer afford to match up with the big wigs with deep pockets? Then it's a losing game. And are all of these trends improving justice? I'm not so sure. So to answer your question, it's a complex question, but to answer it in short, I would say that your engagement with the philosophy of law has to be far deeper. You have to understand, I mean, jurisprudence, the philosophy of the law, the ethics of the law, what is justice are hardly questions that one can answer easily, right? And if you want those answers and you want them also from a practitioner's point of view, then please give that scope and time. And also learn for yourself. Please don't be under the impression that you're going to find these answers sitting at a desk or behind a laptop. I mean, I've personally spent a great deal of time soul searching and grappling with what it means to be a professional, what goes, what doesn't go, what is it that enhances the system's efficiency, what are the things we mustn't do, what interventions do we need, etc. And therefore, I would think that the very module and the model of legal education, especially in the NLUs, has to lay emphasis upon that. Your other question was about the role of the government. Yes, of course. I mean, in a sense, look, courts don't fund themselves. Courts rely upon the government for infrastructure. Even if it's e-infrastructure, you're naturally dependent on the government in a sense. Of course, the government doesn't have the last word on it, but it means a greater collaboration. So the government then becomes a two-faced sort of creature because the government is a litigant and the biggest litigant at that. And at the same time, the government is also a collaborator in this provision of service. So it has a very important role to play. And I think that's where then the officers that man the government, the advocate generals and the chief secretaries and so on who interact with the judiciary have to come with a very different hat on. And there are some good officers there who do it. There are good AGs who do it, who are not going to come there with a vested interest, but are going to come there in the larger constitutional scheme to say, how is it that you work with the courts, right? I'll give you a very simple example. When you file a case in the court, you're required to serve an advance copy upon the government in a writ petition. Otherwise, you can't press for an interim prayer. It's a rule of thumb. Now, today during the lockdown, how are you going to serve that? You can't go running helter-skelter to serve copies, right? You may not be let into the court because of the quarantine. The counsel may not be available. You may not want to risk going to an office and exposing yourself to COVID. What's the simple solution? Introduce e-service of documents. And that's exactly what our Chief Justice has ordered. This is where technology comes in. There's a question in your chat box and I'll answer it later maybe. Where is it that the courts can rely on technology? So this is one direct instance. That why should service of copies be by registered post, by hand, etc. Have authorized official email IDs to which documents can be sent in PDF in advance. But that also requires government agencies to walk 2 steps forward. Most government agencies, you will notice, have Gmail IDs. Now, can you then risk serving sensitive court documents on Gmail? You don't know who it's going to, who's reading it, right? So that's where everyone has to get a little more sophisticated. And I would think that these there may be minor changes, but these changes are important in working with the courts to try and expedite how justice delivery can be done. There's the role of the government as a litigant. Then there is the larger role. So even an e-filing or case management or information management or obtaining of certified copies in advance, research support. I made a list of some of these things. The very listing of cases can be automated to make it more efficient. Why is it that old cases sometimes don't come up? Should not then, I see Hrishikesh's point. That is where you have the need to intervene. Maybe a bot ought not to be reading a draft and telling a court what's important or not, but a bot can look at the pending cases in the court registry and tell you that a criminal case against a conviction where no bail is granted is a high priority case, right? That case should come up a bit faster. A senior citizen's case should come up faster. Are there cases that are getting lost in the deadwood somewhere? How do you revamp the registry? And that also, funnily, is going to require a government support in one sense. The government can't, again, poke its nose in an essential judicial function. Let's be very clear there. You know there is a separation of powers. The executive can't tell the courts how to run the courts per se. But there is a certain support and an intervention that is needed. If there's a need for expertise or a think tank to be created for inputs to be provided in that sense, and you can have a core team that works with the chief justices of the states to do it, then that is also a step forward in the right direction.
Mr. Mahalingam, your take. I want you to answer the same question on how education needs to evolve, what the government needs to do. And the other thing, I think, just directly, I didn't get a chance to ask you, but I also want you to tackle the question of taking away jobs. Does all this really result in jobs being lost, or are we looking at it wrong? Is what Dr. Sondhi is saying, that it's going to aid us, but there's no question of jobs going away because the very nature of tech is not to replace humans. What's your view?
Yeah, I don't think there's a straight answer to some of this stuff. It's still evolving, as you know. But I think the way I look at it, on the jobs question, it's fairly straightforward. At least for the next few years, we are very clear that jobs are there. The question is, how do you upskill to be able to present yourself for the new job that is created? There's enough research to say that the jobs that are there today are not going to be the jobs which are available 15, 20 years down the road. So how would you, as a law student, and I'm targeting the law student in this particular case, how would you sort of upskill yourself to be able to do this? I mean, you could do a variety of stuff. You could go and do something on the business side. You could do something on the tech coding side. or you could just end up doing something more on the academic side of stuff. But a lot of that needs to then be fleshed out and brought into a sort of a bespoke job which will be created subsequently. I think the career paths for some of these jobs are not clear, but I think there is enough sort of uh, aspiration amongst the folks to be able to do something beyond what they are doing right now. So I think it's a question of figuring out what that right balance is for you. In terms of whether jobs will get taken away, I mean, when the BPO industry came, I think we were all scared and saying, oh my God, with technology, everything will go. And there's enough technology to do it, but we still have BPO operators which are there. Of course, it's now moved to maybe other countries outside India so that there is a challenge, but that doesn't mean that there are no other jobs in the country. And person who was in the BPO has moved into somewhere else in the tech side of things. So I'm not saying go and be a delivery boy at a company, but I think you need to figure out what is the right balance for you to be able to gain the most of your legal education. Having said that, the school itself does need to focus on more practical, pragmatic skills for the students. I mean, I understand that the curriculum which was there 20 years back when we studied is pretty much repeated even today with a few minor tweaks. I think the practice of law has evolved so much. And even when I was sort of graduating from law school and joined Amarchand, I sort of wondered what I was getting out of my law school education because everything felt so alien when I went into the real world. So I think, of course, today there are so many courses, so many people helping bridge that gap between the education academic world and the sort of professional sort of world which is there. And I know Aditya has just recently done a video on how do you be a first generation lawyer and all of that stuff, which I'm sure has some interesting insights as well. So there are several of these use cases which are coming in where I think students have to go out and be proactive about this. I've also found like the whole Google search environment becoming more popular among students. And with this whole virtual internships and virtual studies, I see the Google environment has actually progressed and become stronger. I would strongly advise against that. I mean, Google is fine for doing some basic quick searches and that kind of stuff, but you still, as a junior lawyer, or at least someone who's interested in the profession, need to get into some of the basics of what the law is and the jurisprudence of it and the technicalities of some of the topics that you're studying, because when you do get into the real world, these are what are going to be questioned, and your Google skills will only take you to that much. So I do think there is a lot the academic world can do, and I see that there are many new professors and students coming into this place who are coming in with bright new ideas, and I do hope all of that will change in the next maybe 5 to 10 years. I see a marked sort of world of difference over there.
Shivam and Hrishikesh, what would you have liked to have studied? How would you have seen education different? What would have made more sense? Would you have done anything different, or you think it was useful the way you the way you did your degree and what you did after? Hrishikesh, start with you.
Sure. So I think I on that point I take Aditya and Karthik's points. Of course, the NLS structure where we were in Nagar Bhavi, very far from the city, unlike say GLC Bombay, where students are after class hours they're going and working with lawyers in Bombay. So to that extent, yes, NLS did divorce us. I think that's the word Aditya used. Did divorce us from the realities, quote unquote, of the profession. So that's a good and a bad thing, right? It's a bad thing because once you get into the profession, if you want to get into the legal practice, it's definitely a very, very tough climb, particularly if you're a first generation lawyer, which is why Aditya's achievements are all the more commendable. But it was a good thing, I feel, because it really taught us to question radically the things that we saw around us. So if I was in if I was in the college, in the Madras Law College, right, would I have taken the journey of starting Vakil Search, or would I have just gone into, I would have been a second generation lawyer if I'd gone to practice. So would I have just followed in my father's footsteps? Probably I would have followed in my father's footsteps. It would have been the easy path for me to take. It was well laid out, right? So I think what NLS did, and I'm going to be forever eternally grateful to the institution for that, is it really encouraged us to question radically. It was a liberal arts and legal education combined into one, and that power and that the drive to question, right, is really what I owe what I am to in some sense today. So could it have been more connected, more tightly coupled with the legal system, with the courts and the structure in Bangalore? Most definitely yes. Can the college do more today? I think with Aditya joining the bench, there'll be a catalyst for that too. But can it do more today in terms of being more tightly coupled with the system? Yes. And with the metro also being there in Bangalore, law students can travel, can attend hearings, can assist lawyers. So for someone who's aspiring for a career in practice, definitely I think a lot more can be done, and a lot more should be done. So it's never too late, and it's a time when we can pick it up. What I think NLS should not lose, on the other hand, is the fact that it really drives that that questioning instinct, the liberal arts instinct, which is tremendously useful, right? So I feel that what we need to do, considering that we are tremendously privileged, all of us are tremendously privileged. We have had or we are having a great education. We have the power to question. We have the intellect. We need to really question what kind of legal system, and I say this in the broadest sense, right? From starting a company to filing a case in court, what kind of legal system do we want to head towards? And that is the lens through which we must ask and look at all of our questions. Right? That's the lens through which we must evaluate where do we stand today. I think all of us would agree that it's a very sad reflection on us after 70 years of independence, and we are where we are today. And I say this based on metrics. I have not, except for my internships, I've never practiced in court. But based on metrics, I think if you just want to place the metrics of India vis-a-vis any barometer, India fares very poorly. Right? So from the lens of metrics, where we are today versus where we need to be, what are the steps that we need to take, and how do we serve the cause of justice better? Technology is one huge enabler, which I'm a big champion for. I'm a champion for because I see it on a day-to-day basis. I'm seeing on a day-to-day basis what graph neural networks can do, what machine learning is able to do. So I think one of the questions was, is it far-fetched to say that technology can be an enabler today? I think it's not far-fetched at all. Right? So has it been applied in the practice of law today? No, the answer is no, it has not been applied. But could it be applied? If judges and lawyers were to, if judges particularly and the struct system were to allow graph neural networks to be applied to the process of reading documents, could it make a huge dent? Yes, it could. And it will only get accelerated. So within 2-3 years of machine learning being actively implemented, you will see that it's 100x more efficient than it is today from the day you let it get implemented. So is it far-fetched that it can happen tomorrow? No. Is it far-fetched that the system will allow it to happen tomorrow? Yes. Because they're the gatekeepers of the system to today probably don't want it to be implemented for whatever reasons and for whatever fears that they have. But is the technology here? Yes. Can it make a dramatic difference? Yes. Will it be allowed to make a dramatic difference? We'll have to see.
So just in terms of time, what I want to do, Shivam, your quick reactions on the same question on the education piece, but then a couple of questions I want to take from the audience, maybe for 15 minutes, and then give all of you a chance to give some closing comments. So Shivam, what's your reaction to legal education for legal tech?
Right. So I think it's definitely a very hard question because I think this problem of the disconnect of the education from the real world scenario is not just restricted to law, but it's across the education in the country. Even when we talk about engineers, where we see that there are computer science engineers who are even now taught particular languages, even 20 years beyond, like after the point when those languages have stopped being common, right? So I think this problem is not just restricted to law, but it's more of a problem of the Indian education system per se, and I am not too sure if legal curriculum per se can help students adapt and cope up with technical changes, because the speed of technical changes will always be faster than the speed at which we can change the curriculum. So I think relating to what Hrishikesh was saying, that some kind of more coupling and more attaching to the real world scenario is probably that can help. That will definitely help, and that is definitely needed. And yeah, I think there is along with that, obviously, as I said, there is another problem which is there in the market, is the problem of solutioning. So I would also encourage a lot of law students to not just be fearful that, okay, what do we need to do to protect ourselves from the advent of technology. They should probably try to be on the other side, and be on the other side where they can influence these changes.
Thanks, Shivam. So just moving to some of the questions, some of them are very interesting. So Dr. Sondhi, would you like to answer the one that you read? Let me read it for the attendees. What is the white space with respect to aiding the judiciary? While core tasks cannot be automated, for what tasks can one use technology?
I think that's now moved to the answered section, because I answered.
Anything to add? I mean, if there's anything, you had made a list, so I thought if there's something you want to add to it. Otherwise, I'm happy to move through some of the.
We'll save time and move on to a.
Perfect. Okay. So, on account of everything being virtual, COVID-19 might lead to a surge in legal tech startups, but the turbulence in the economy might also cut their funding. In terms of crystal ball gazing, which of these aspects is more likely to determine the future of these startups? Hrishikesh or Shivam, would you like to take that? What's been the funding experience?
Shivam, go for it.
So I think obviously the way most people think about startups and the way they get to know about startups is through media, and media primarily talks about startup funding. Startup is equivalent to funding for media. But I think on ground, that's not the case. Startups are more about the problem solution match. And I think if there is and obviously within the legal sphere, there are a lot of problems. There are a lot of problems across legal processes, across different verticals within the law. And wherever there has been a solution, a good solution that solves an important problem, I don't think there have been such problems around funding.
Hrishikesh, something to add?
No, absolutely. I think that's bang on. We have been fortunate enough at Vakil Search to have been able to raise funding. And I think that the reason is that, like Shivam said, if you're solving a problem and you're able to demonstrate that you're able to solve a problem and therefore impact a significant number of people, typically you'll be able to at least draw investors to listen to you, if not fund you. So I think that makes complete sense. Karthik has been just recently completed a stint at Flipkart, right? So I think that's the mother of all startups as far as India is concerned. So on the fundraising question, maybe even he has some insights to add.
Mr. Mahalingam, that question, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I think we're in a very different space, and the numbers that we talk about would fund the entire legal tech universe, so to speak. So I think it's a very different ballgame. But I think it's an interesting question, because when I was at MIT, I was actually considering doing something to start like an incubator for legal tech startups, to maybe even provide funding and all of that stuff. And I spoke to several people on this, and I also did some of the math on this. But when you look at it, first of all, the universe is very small. Adoption rates are very tough. Ability to have and convince investors about this topic is much higher. Ability of investors to understand this topic is higher. And a lot of the investors are not even taking the effort to understand it. And they're investing in a whole bunch of SaaS startups. But when you mention legal tech or reg tech, I think somewhere they're sort of blinders are on, and they're like, no, we don't look at this kind of space, or we have one or two in that space, or whatever of that sort. So when I actually at the beginning of the session mentioned kudos to the founders who do this, I think perseverance and resilience are very high skills for some of these founders to be able to do it, because they're working out of a very small limited universe. But having said that, I think, as they mentioned, for the right product market fit, there are investors who are still keen and are seeing great returns on that. So I would still say that if you have the opportunity to work at one of these legal tech startups, you should definitely do that. So.
There's a related question. I think, Mr. Mahalingam, you can take that. Similar to law firms, should India follow a protectionist regime when foreign startups are allowed? So do you think that would tackle some of what's going on? You mentioned DocuSign. Any views on foreign startups?
So actually, I don't believe on the protectionist regime. I do believe we have to have some reciprocal arrangements, but I think this protectionist regime is not what I subscribe to. In terms of reciprocal arrangements, of course, I think there is a lot that we can benefit from in terms of what the foreign law firms and corporates seem to offer. But I think we do have a lot of strong points of our own. And I'm a strong believer in Make for India, Digital India, Vocal for India, all of that. So I think we do have this, and we shouldn't necessarily be sort of aping the West for a lot of these things. So they have a lot to learn from us as well. And I've spoken to several people. The Indian market is extremely different, extremely difficult for a foreign law firm to come in and sort of crack easily. A lot of firms have come in, have tried. A lot of them are friends, but I think it's quite challenging still. And they have some time and some work to do before they get to where an Indian law firm is. And I'm talking about a mid to large law firm in India.
Dr. Sondhi, maybe this one you could take. Whenever there's talk of technology, we have to keep in mind the issues of digital divide. Given the inaccessibility of tech, could legal tech really end up creating silos or of the haves and have-nots? So some of what you mentioned, maybe this would be relevant to that.
That is a real issue. If we are talking about technology interventions and technology substitution, then we have to democratize technology all the same. If you're not going to do that, then it's at loggerheads with the concept of justice, right? Justice is supposed to be equally available to all. How you execute that is the challenge. So I certainly think that that is a difficulty. We're seeing that even in the limited sense of conducting VC hearings. At the end of the day, funnily enough, the council with a better Wi-Fi connection or with better bandwidth can end up being the successful counsel in a case. That should not be the technology answer. Somebody in a district or in a rural office or in a rural court, some courts are sometimes finding it difficult to have the technology support that they need. Submissions may not be audible to courts in some cases. In some cases, it's completely hit out of the park. So those dichotomies are indeed coming in. That can have an impact, a very deep impact, because as I said earlier, it can in some way be a function of affordability. Of course, we've realized now that technology is so quickly developing that at its core, it's becoming affordable also in a cost sense. Folks are in fact migrating from having physical libraries to having online libraries. So that's in a way seen as being more affordable for a young lawyer. So there are advantages. If you're first generation and young, in some way, your practice may be more affordable in a funny way today than it was, say, 20 years ago. You may not even need an office space. Clients have become more comfortable, I think, in interacting with counsel over VC, as is the medical profession. So those synergies and energies are changing. That might be to your advantage. But I would be troubled if we go down this path where it ultimately becomes a function of who can afford the better technology to be a better lawyer. That's a difficult scenario for me to live with. So if the powers that be are making these interventions, I think you have to keep an eye on the weakest consumer in a sense. We talk so much about legal aid and pro bono work. So then we need to also build into it affordable technology, right? What is the whole conversation around the vaccine today? Why are you talking about making the vaccine free and available and affordable to all? It's justice, right? It's equity. And I think that same conversation should take place with technology and the practice of the law as well.
Hrishikesh, this is a specific one for you. I think the corporate legal market of India is very small. Is it fair to say that startups won't have large data sets for training their algorithms? And Mr. Datta's point regarding AI learning consistently is still far-fetched. So what's your view on data?
No, I definitely disagree, right? So we have 63 million small businesses in India. 63 million is more than the population of many European countries. 63 million is third only to US and China in terms of the business ecosystem in the country. We have 2 million businesses which have, or 12 million businesses which have registered for GST. So 12 million GST-IN numbers are already there. Each of these businesses are uploading anywhere between 7 to 10 invoices a month, right? So that's 120 million invoices a month. Minimum, right? I mean, the companies like TVS or Bajaj would be uploading millions of invoices. So on an average, that's about 1.5 billion invoices a year. So there's an enormous amount of data that we can work with. We have 1.3 crore litigants in 130 crore population, which I think is a problem in and of itself, but it's a different discussion. So 1.3 crore litigants, meaning at least 0.65 crore case files, right? And then of course submissions from both parties. So the amount of data that exists for data processing is huge. Simply by the law of large numbers, I don't think we have that problem.
Shivam, maybe you can take this one. In terms of the type of technological products offered, what are the gaps that exist in the legal tech landscape in India at the moment, and what sort of opportunities are available for new entrepreneurs?
Okay, I think that's a very wide question. But to be honest, I think the entire legal profession is up for technical disruption in terms of the scope of optimization that is there. So instead of pointing specific opportunities out, I think the entire legal ecosystem is up for grabs.
Perfect. So I think we've got about 20 minutes. I need to give a couple minutes to the organizers. I want to run the poll again, just to see if people have changed their opinion on the second question. And then I would love some closing comments from all our panelists. So let me quickly run the poll. So this is the one which is on the the jobs question. Now that we've sort of given some perspective on what we think could be the disruption. So please go ahead and vote. I've just opened it up. Panelists can vote as well. So go ahead. We were at 49.51 when we started. You'll be quite interested. The results are surprising. So
very surprised that a group of students and panelists from NLS feels it's 49.51. Right?
Yeah. But let me give you a few more seconds. Let's let a few more people vote. But and then maybe we can do three or 4 minutes closing comments from each of you. Okay, I think I can end it. So the results now are 62% are saying no. So there's definitely been some shift.
My campaigning might have helped that.
So that's good. So 62-38 now. But Dr. Sondhi, you've heard us, you've heard everyone, and as someone who's spent so much time, what's your take? What's your view at 30,000 feet? Where are we headed? Some closing thoughts.
It's a hard place to fall from, right? So I should be careful what I say. No, it's been a fascinating exchange, and I think I've learned a lot from all of you. I think all of us should hesitate to guard our turf. We have to be open, welcoming, but I want to say, because most of your participants, I believe, are students, I do want to say that don't denude yourself that just because you're better with technology, or if there is better technology on offer, you're automatically going to be a better lawyer. If that was the case, then IT engineers should be lawyers. And I say this with respect. I think every profession has its complexity that you must dwell upon. Technology, it's publicly known that in many ways, dependence on technology has shrunk our brains. we don't use our brains enough, or we don't use parts of our brains to the extent that we ought to be. And that's a dangerous way to go down. I mean, I was reading a book called Breath, where, the author speaks of something called email apnea. So just like you have sleep apnea when you stop breathing in your sleep sometime, people are actually suffering from email apnea or tech apnea, which is that need to switch from one technology input to the other at a point when you're actually not breathing. If that's being more human, I don't know. You may not even live to see the day. So be a little careful. Cal Newport speaks of deep learning, right? You need to drink deep in that fountain of knowledge. Just because something's simpler or faster doesn't mean it's better. Where I great points made, I think especially by Hrishikesh, and we have to see how the technology interface can enhance the profession. Make it more subtle and more meaningful to people, not to dumb down the profession. And that's my word of caution. I think we've all said everything that we wanted to, but please don't get swept away with technology to an extent that you forget what a deep learning of the law is in the first place.
Mr. Mahalingam, do we have a moderate view before we give Hrishikesh the chance to tell us that, there's a lot of good potential. So go ahead, Mr. Mahalingam.
And I'll keep it short so I can let him sort of argue. No, so I think it's a very interesting space to be in. We're at that cusp where I think we do have a lot of potential. It's how we harness that potential to get it to the next level. There are certain mistakes and there are certain learnings that we have made along the way, which definitely will help improve the next steps of this journey. I know there's a lot of discussion on the future of work, but I think the future of law is at question as well right now, because the law as we know it and as we've practiced it will change, irrespective of what people's independent views are. It is already changing. So I think we do need to keep that in mind. And I will reiterate my previous comment about upskilling, because being a lawyer is no longer enough. You have to be more of a generalist. You have to think about variety of other things, which may not even be connected to the law. And I think these are very critical skills which we need to develop from today, so that 15 to 20 years down the line, when this achieves critical mass, you are at a right position to harness and to benefit from this. So I think that's my sort of takeaway from this.
Hrishikesh, what advice do you have for young entrepreneurs?
So first of all, I think every lawyer, especially the ones who are in private practice, are also entrepreneurs, right? So I think Aditya's journey in setting up from scratch was no different from very different functionally. But in terms of the journey, the challenges, etc., the challenges are in abundance for someone who is starting their own solo career in practice, or starting their own law firm, or starting a legal tech company. So the entrepreneurship viewed from the perspective of venturing into the unknown is something that students will have to do, even if they go down the path of legal practice. Having said that, just to round off what I've been trying to say today, the reason I've from the beginning been talking about the law from the perspective of commoditization has been that we need commoditization automatically brings with it clear defined parameters, right? In terms of time, in terms of quality, in terms of delivery speed and delivery acceptable standards for delivery. So we need to start looking at the legal system as looking at people as customers of the legal service, right? That simple, changing the word from litigant or client to a customer of the legal service. As an independent nation, we are delivering this product or service to customers. The customers are the common people and small businesses. From the moment you look at an individual or a small business as a customer of the legal justice system, whether it's starting a company or filing a case in court, then the same rules which we apply to consumer protection law should ideally apply even to a customer of legal service. So if I'm filing a case in court, I very well deserve to know how long it's going to take. I deserve to have access to, I deserve to not have my case languish unless there is an unavoidable reason for it to take a certain amount of time. I deserve to have access to lawyers who will fight that case for me, right? If I file an application before the MCA, I deserve to have that application heard and resolved in a certain span of time. So these are things that we need to start fighting. We need to change the paradigm with which we look at the system itself. We need to demand that the system delivers, and currently it is not delivering. Right. So we as students of the law school have an enormous opportunity to start asking those tough questions. Right. And wherever we can at Vakil Search, we are trying to make a small dent, but we keep saying every day is day one because there's such a huge ocean to pass, to swim through, that we just believe we are just beginning today. And all of the students here today, they have that unique opportunity because technology has come to a point where I feel, and I'm a huge optimist there, disruption is inevitable. It is going to happen. In the next 5 to 10 years, profound disruption is going to happen. So they are at the cusp of, they're going to be able to see that disruption firsthand. So I wish them all the best. And I just want them to keep their eyes and ears open to the curve of disruption, not resist it. Like I think Aditya also said, don't resist the disruption. Don't get swayed by it. But don't resist it either. And be a part of the transformation that this country deserves. So that's how I would end.
Shivam, you're the youngest on the panel. What do you have? What's been your experience? What advice would you have? Any closing thoughts?
Right. So I am definitely looking at the entire ecosystem from a very optimistic perspective. I think in the last decade, we started to change a lot of processes within the legal ecosystem. And I think if we in this decade, we will see a lot of massive efficiency being brought in. And if we have, if there's a panel like this at 2030, I think the conversation will be entirely different. And I'm pretty confident of that. And I think there are in the way the law is practiced today, there are some good parts and there are some bad parts. I think if we look at technology to remove that bad monotonous parts of the practice of law, I think that's a good way to look at it. And I think we are also, the market is also looking at it from that perspective. So I am very optimistic and I look forward to hearing what the conclusion to this discussion in 2030.
Thank you. Dr. Sondhi, anything else? Or, I think we'll give it back to the LTech. I think they wanted a few minutes to go ahead. So Harshit and team, if you would like to, I think you wanted a few minutes. So go ahead. Thank you very much, all of the panel for making the time on Sunday. And all the attendees for choosing to spend 2 hours with us on Sunday evening. I hope the discussion was useful and it inspires you to at least ask a few questions about what you're studying. If some entrepreneurs already on down the path. Ask yourself why you're doing what you're doing. Can you relook at your models? Can you do it differently? Can you, so I think, thank you. Thanks a lot. Over to you, Kabir.
Thank you, Rishi. You were a great moderator, by the way. I thoroughly enjoyed the session and all the comments from everybody here on the panel was very, very enlightening.
We second that, absolutely.
Go ahead.
So, yeah, just a short vote of thanks from my side. So, we seem to have arrived at the conclusion of the discussion for today with a strong sense that there remains scope for a lot more of this discourse. And as LTech, as NLSIU, we shall look forward to possibilities of picking it up again at a later date. But for now, I would like to take this moment to extend gratitude to everyone behind the successful completion of today's session. And on behalf of myself and LTech, ACLA and NLSIU, I would like to thank our extremely learned panelists, Dr. Aditya Sondhi, Mr. Karthik Mahalingam, Mr. Hrishikesh Datar, Mr. Shivam Singla for their diverse and enriching insights, perspectives, and stories in their discussion. And I also would like to thank Mr. Rishi Shroff for skillfully moderating and navigating the discussion and tying together the various streams of thought into one whole. This was indeed an unprecedented confluence of diverse approaches to the interface of law, technology, and business. And while the session today answered a lot of our questions, it has also given us inspiration to wonder and marvel at what the future holds for us. And there certainly remains a lot more to be explored. I trust that it was an extremely worthwhile experience for all attending the event. And finally, I would like to thank our valued attendees who enriched and contributed to the discussion with their ingenious queries. Allow me to remind you to kindly fill in the feedback forms, which are accessible through the link in the chat, so that we may incorporate your suggestions towards future events, and also send across your certificates, which are a token of our appreciation and a memento of the event. This was Kabir Jay, Joint Convener of FELTECH. Once again, I thank you all and look forward to seeing you in our future events. Good evening.
Thank you.